Something is shifting in the world right now. You can feel it in prices, in stress levels, in conversations, in the emotional tone of everyday life. It's subtle, but unmistakable. People are struggling to keep up. Bills feel heavier, work feels more demanding, the future feels less clear than it used to. But this feeling, this quiet pressure moving through society, is not new. It is part of a long, historical rhythm, the period just before a major economic reset. Today, we're going to explore the psychology driving this moment through the historical pattern that has shaped civilizations for thousands of years, the long-term economic cycle, and the psychological storm that arrives when a cycle reaches its turning point. This is the calm explanation of why today feels so heavy, and why the pressure building beneath the surface is a sign that a reset is coming. Not a collapse, not an ending, but a resetting, a structural rebalancing that has happened many times before. Economic anxiety doesn't appear out of nowhere. It rises when the system becomes unbalanced, when the cost of everything increases faster than incomes, when debts grow faster than productivity, when the optimism of the boom years turns into the pressure of the late cycle years. And historically, when societies reach this phase, the emotional tone of the population changes. This is the psychology of the late stage of a long-term debt cycle. It is not a modern problem, it is a structural one. Every time an economic cycle reaches maturity, from ancient civilizations to medieval trade empires to industrial nations, people felt the exact same emotional signs you are feeling now. The present is simply one more chapter in a story the world has lived through many times before. Modern economies feel complex, but their long-term behavior is surprisingly simple. Every major society in history has moved through the same economic rhythm. This cycle can last 30, 50, or even 80 years, depending on the society. We are living through stage 4 and stage 5 right now. This is the period where costs rise, debt becomes harder to manage, confidence slips, uncertainty spreads, people feel tired, worried, and stretched thin. This emotional shift isn't random. It is the psychological footprint of the economic cycle approaching a reset. One of the most painful parts of a late cycle slowdown is that it feels personal. When prices rise faster than wages, your mind interprets this as, "I'm falling behind." When the system becomes unbalanced, people blame themselves for structural problems they did not create. This is why, historically, people in late cycle periods describe emotional burnout, increased anxiety, loss of confidence, pessimism, fear of the future, a sense of being overwhelmed by invisible forces. These feelings are not psychological weaknesses. They are psychological responses to structural forces. In other words, you are not behind. You are living through the pressure phase of a cycle that billions of people before you have experienced. Let's look at a few long-term cycles from history, not through politics, but through emotional patterns. The Roman Late Republic, 120 to 30 BCE, rising costs, debt saturation, wealth concentration, falling confidence, widespread anxiety. The emotional tone shifted for decades before the reset. The 1800s long-term British debt cycle, debt expansion during industrialization, rising inequality, widespread anxiety, cultural depression, leading to restructuring in the next cycle. Post-World War II, debt cycle, 1945 to today. We have been living through the tail end of a massive long-term debt cycle, and the emotional patterns match historical records perfectly. Rising cost of living, shrinking savings, productivity slowing, debts peaking, confidence weakening, anxiety spreading socially. This is not a mystery, it is a cycle. When debt becomes too high, when costs outrun incomes, when expectations outgrow reality, the system eventually resets itself. Economists call this rebalancing, structural adjustment. But the emotional experience is what people feel most. Uncertainty, fatigue, frustration, fear that the system no longer works. A reset happens because the system needs to become healthy again. It does not mean collapse, it means rebalancing. Historically, resets fix what became unsustainable. Excess debt is reduced, costs fall back into alignment, productivity resets, innovation rises. The next cycle begins. Resets create room for a new period of growth. A great reset is not just an economic event, it is a psychological event. People must move from unrealistic expectations to grounded expectations. From, I should be able to keep up with this pace, to no one can keep up with the late-stage cycle. From, this is my fault, to this is structural, not personal. From, something is wrong with me, to I'm living through a historical turning point. This psychological shift is the beginning of emotional clarity, and emotional clarity is the first step toward preparing for what comes next. When people hear the word reset, their minds jump to fear, collapse, or chaos. But historically, resets do not arrive like sudden earthquakes. They arrive like long winters, slow, gradual, predictable, and necessary for the next spring. The anxiety people feel today is not a sign of collapse. It's a sign that the system is reaching the point where a reset becomes necessary and therefore inevitable. But inevitable does not mean catastrophic. It means the system has stretched to its limit and now must exhale. Before every reset, there is a psychological pressure phase. It feels like the entire world is tightening. Workloads, responsibilities, costs, expectations, emotional bandwidth. This tightening phase has 3 emotional stages. 1. Quiet discomfort. People notice things. Groceries cost more, bills rise, wages stagnate. Things feel slightly heavier. This is early cycle tension. 2. Public frustration. People start talking. Everything is more expensive. Life is harder than it used to be. I feel like I'm falling behind. This spreads anxiety socially. 3. Widespread exhaustion. This is where we are now, exhaustion. It's the emotional signal that the system is stretched to its peak, the point where a reset becomes inevitable. In every historical cycle, this exhaustion phase lasted years, not days. It is slow, steady, and structural. This is why the present economic moment feels foggy, heavy, and uncertain, because society is psychologically preparing for the next transition. Economic resets feel personal because the brain interprets them personally. When the economy tightens, the mind says, I must be doing something wrong. Why is this so hard now? Why can't I keep up? Why does my money not stretch anymore? But historically, people across societies felt the same way at the same point in the cycle. The Roman merchants felt this. European workers in the 1600s felt this. Citizens in Victorian Britain felt this. Americans in the 1970s felt this. It is a psychological illusion to believe you are individually failing. The truth is, you are living through a structural phase where systems become harder for everyone. The cycle is what's tightening, not your competence. The system is what's overstretched, not your worth. When you zoom out historically, you see that the late cycle anxiety is a universal human experience, repeated across centuries. The reset is not coming because something is wrong. It is coming because the cycle has reached its natural maturity. Here are the structural indicators. 1. Debt saturation. When debt grows faster than income for too long, a rebalancing becomes necessary. This is not emotional, it is mathematical. 2. Cost of living rising faster than productivity. This creates a gap between living conditions and real earnings. Reset reduces this imbalance through price normalization and structural shifts. 4. Confidence erosion. When public confidence falls, spending slows, which forces the system to shift gears. 5. Stretched expectations. When society expects continuous growth, but the system enters stagnation, a reset realigns expectations with reality. These forces do not cause panic, they cause transition. The same transition the world has experienced dozens of times before. Before a society enters a reset, something subtle but profound happens. People begin to let go of the expectations, habits, and assumptions that belong to the previous economic cycle. This letting go process is not loud, dramatic, or sudden. It happens quietly, internally, inside the minds of millions of individuals at the same time, and it always follows the same emotional arc. Let's break it down clearly. Phase 1. Denial of change. At the beginning of the tightening phase, people try to maintain the old rhythm. I just need to work harder. I can push through this. I'm sure things will go back to normal soon. This phase is fueled by the belief that the conditions of the previous cycle can somehow return if we keep trying. People hold on because the old cycle feels familiar. It feels safe, even if it is unsustainable. Phase 2. Realization of imbalance. Gradually, people begin to recognize that they are working harder and getting less in return. This is the moment when people say, "Why does everything feel more difficult now? Why can't I keep up?" This realization is not negative. It is the first step of clarity. Every historical reset began when the population collectively recognized what the system refused to acknowledge. The old cycle was ending. Phase 3. Emotional fatigue. This is the psychological peak of late cycle stress. People are not panicked. They are tired, not dramatic, just worn down, not devastated, just stretched thin. Emotional fatigue appears as lower motivation, mental fog, burnout, decreased optimism, feelings of stagnation, quiet frustration. This is the phase we are living through today, and it is the emotional precursor to a reset. Phase 4. Surrendering the old expectations. Eventually, society reaches a point where it becomes clear that the old way of living cannot continue unchanged. Historically, this psychological shift has always preceded renewal. People begin to say, "I need to rethink how I live. I need to find clarity again." This surrender is not defeat. It is the moment the mind becomes flexible and open to the next cycle. Humans are incredibly adaptable. Once they accept the shift, they begin to evolve quickly. This is the turning point where anxiety becomes clarity and clarity becomes strength. Every society rebounded after reaching this phase. Adaptation is renewal. Renewal is the beginning of the next cycle,